This isn't some fictional tale I cooked up, it's a memory that's been seared into my soul. What I'm about to tell you is the true story of how my own blood tried to bury me, and how I clawed my way out of the grave they dug. The weight of the Mont Blanc pen felt heavier than it ever had in the 50 years I'd owned it. It was resting beside a stack of papers that my son, Julian, had just slid across the polished oak of my dining room table. We were all there, my daughter Evelyn, her husband, even my 2 young grandchildren, supposedly to celebrate my 70th birthday. But the first words out of Julian's mouth after the plates were cleared were not of celebration, but of execution. "Dad," he said, his voice smooth as poison, "we need you to sign these. It's for your own good. We're going to take care of everything now." I looked down, and through my reading glasses, I saw the letterhead of a law firm I didn't recognize, and the words power of attorney and declaration of incompetence. My heart stopped. When I looked up, Evelyn wasn't looking at me, but at Julian, and she nodded, a silent confirmation that my life as I knew it was over. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. It's funny how the mind works in moments of pure shock. I wasn't thinking about the business, Blackwood Construction, the company I'd started with nothing but a used pickup truck and calloused hands. I wasn't thinking about the millions in the bank or the properties scattered across Boston. I was thinking about that pen. A gift from my late wife, Maria, on the day we broke ground on our first major project. She'd saved for a year to buy it. For signing important things, Arthur, she'd said, her smile as bright as the future we were building. Now, her children, our children, wanted me to use it to sign away that very future, to declare myself a ghost in my own life. I pushed the papers back. "No," I said, my voice a low growl that surprised even me. "Absolutely not." Julian sighed, the sound of a man burdened by a chore he found distasteful but necessary. "We were hoping you wouldn't be difficult, Dad." Evelyn finally spoke, her tone dripping with a cloying, manufactured pity. "It's already done, Daddy. We had Dr. Albright evaluate you last month. Remember those nice chats you had with him? The judge already signed the order. This is just a formality to make the transition smoother." The blood drained from my face. Dr. Albright. The friendly psychiatrist Evelyn had insisted I see, saying she was worried about my forgetfulness. They weren't chats, they were interrogations, twisted into a weapon against me. They had been planning this for months, maybe years. Every misplaced set of keys, every forgotten name, every senior moment was now a nail in my coffin. Security guards, 2 of them, dressed in black suits, stepped into the dining room from the foyer. I hadn't even heard them enter. They were big, impassive, their eyes avoiding mine. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it felt like the world had tilted on its axis. My own children, casting me aside like a broken tool. I looked at my grandchildren, who were watching with wide, confused eyes, and for the first time in my life, I felt a shame so deep it was suffocating. They were watching their grandfather be unmade. Julian picked up the pen, my pen, and held it out to me. "Sign it, Dad. Or they'll make you." That was the moment the old Arthur Blackwood, the builder, the patriarch, died. And something else, something much colder and harder, began to form in the rubble. They hadn't just come for my company, they had come for my name, my mind, my legacy. And as those guards moved toward my chair, I knew this wasn't an ending. It was a declaration of war. The assisted living facility was called Serenity Meadows. A laughable name for a place that felt like the world's most luxurious prison. It was nestled in the suburbs west of Boston, all polished floors, muted colors, and the antiseptic smell of false cheer. My children had chosen the best, of course. Not out of love, but to assuage their guilt and keep up appearances. My suite had a lovely view of a meticulously manicured lawn where other ghosts like me were led on slow, shuffling walks. They'd taken everything. My home in Beacon Hill was being prepared for sale, my access to company accounts was severed, and my personal finances were now managed by a trustee who happened to be Julian's college roommate. My cell phone was replaced with a simplified flip phone with only 3 pre-programmed numbers, Julian, Evelyn, and the front desk. They had insulated me, isolated me, buried me alive under a mountain of legal paperwork and patronizing smiles. In those first few weeks, despair was a constant companion. I'd sit by the window, watching the seasons change, feeling the concrete legacy I'd built in the city skyline turn to dust. But a man who spends 50 years wrestling with steel beams and concrete foundations doesn't break easily. The grief slowly, day by day, began to calcify into a cold, hard rage. And with that rage, my mind, the very mind they had declared broken, began to work. I started retracing their steps, replaying the last year in my head. It started small. Julian firing my longtime assistant, Carol, claiming she was redundant in the new digital age. Carol had been with me for 30 years, she was more loyal to me than my own children. Then there was Evelyn's sudden interest in my personal stories, asking me to recall details from projects completed decades ago, her pen scratching away in a notebook. She wasn't cherishing memories, she was gathering data, testing me for weaknesses. The final piece was a memory of walking into my home office a few months back and finding Julian at my private filing cabinet. He'd slammed it shut, claiming he was looking for a childhood photo album. He was a clumsy liar. He'd been stealing my financial records, my medical history, anything he could twist into a narrative of senility. I needed to get in touch with the outside world, but my every move was monitored. I started playing the part they had cast for me. I became the doddering old man. I'd forget which day it was, ask the same questions repeatedly, spill my food during meals. The staff treated me with gentle pity. My children, during their weekly, perfunctory visits, would exchange smug, knowing glances. See, their eyes said. We did the right thing. It was during one of these visits that Evelyn left her purse on the chair next to me. While she was cooing over my progress with the head nurse, I managed to slip my hand inside and retrieve her smartphone. My hands trembled, not from age, but from adrenaline. I palmed it, hiding it under the blanket on my lap. Later that night, long after the final rounds, I pulled it out. I didn't know her passcode, but I didn't need it. I held down the side button. Call Sal Vitale, I whispered. The phone, to my immense relief, began to dial. Sal was my first ever foreman, a man whose hands were as tough as his loyalty. He'd retired 5 years ago. But we still spoke every week. Or we had, until my phone was taken away. He picked up on the second ring. Hello? His voice was gravelly, confused. Sal, I whispered, my voice cracking. It's Arthur. I need your help. They've put me away. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, and then, a low curse. Arthur? Where are you? What the hell is going on? I told him everything, the words pouring out of me in a torrent of whispered fury. When I was finished, there was another long pause. Then he said the words that became the first stone in a new foundation. What do you need me to do, boss? Sal became my hands and eyes in the world I was no longer allowed to inhabit. Our communication was risky and archaic. He would visit once a week during regular hours, posing as a distant cousin. We'd sit in the manicured garden of Serenity Meadows, making small talk about the Red Sox and the weather for the benefit of any watching staff, while I passed him small, folded notes, and he'd whisper updates. My first instruction was simple: find Carol, my old assistant. Julian had given her a generous severance package, but it came with an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. It was hush money. Sal found her working at a small accounting firm in Quincy. She was bitter, angry, and deeply wounded by her dismissal. The NDA had teeth, but Sal, a master of persuasion from his years managing unruly construction crews, didn't ask her to break it. He just asked her to point him in the right direction. She told him to look into the Lexington project, a high-end residential development we had completed 2 years prior. It was Julian's first major solo project, his showpiece. I had always had a bad feeling about it. Julian had been obsessed with cutting costs, using new and proven suppliers from overseas to maximize the profit margin. I had fought him on it, but by then, my voice in the company was already being marginalized. He was meeting with the steel supplier off the books, Sal whispered to me a week later, his face grim. Some outfit out of Turkey. Carol said the invoices he submitted to accounting were 30% higher than the real quote she saw by accident before he fired her. He wasn't just cutting costs, Arthur. He was pocketing the difference. Julian wasn't just greedy, he was a thief. And reckless. Using substandard materials on a 40-story residential tower wasn't just fraud, it was a catastrophe waiting to happen. While Sal was digging into the Lexington project, my children continued their victory tour. They were the new face of Blackwood construction. A fawning article in Boston Business Journal painted them as visionary innovators, bravely steering the family company into the 21st century after their beloved father's tragic decline. They included a picture of me, taken on a good day at Serenity Meadows, where I looked placid and vacant. They were building a narrative, brick by brick, that I was a relic and they were the future. They seemed invincible. They had the money, the legal power, and the media narrative completely under their control. During one of his visits, Julian, reeking of expensive cologne and entitlement, brought a document for me to sign. It was the sale agreement for the old community center in Dorchester. The very first building I had ever constructed. It was a humble, 2-story brick building, but to me, it was more important than all the skyscrapers that followed. It was my cornerstone. It's a prime piece of real estate, Dad, Julian said, his condescension a physical force. Some developer is putting up luxury lofts. We're getting 8 figures for the land. He saw a plot of land. I saw the faces of the kids who used that gym, the elderly folks who played bingo in the main hall. I remembered laying the foundation with my own 2 hands, Maria bringing me coffee in a thermos. I looked at the contract, then up at my son's smug, expectant face. He saw me as a rubber stamp. A brainless formality. In that moment, the embers of rage in my chest roared into an inferno. I would not let them erase my past. I would not let them pave over my soul. I took the pen he offered me. And as I looked him dead in the eye, I made a silent, unbreakable promise to myself. It was the last oath I would ever need to take. They had built their new kingdom on my name. I would be the one to bring the walls crashing down. My resolve hardened into something cold and sharp. The grief was gone, replaced by a singular, clarifying purpose. I was a builder. I knew how to construct things, but more importantly, I knew that every grand structure has a load-bearing wall, a critical point of failure. My children's empire was no different. Their weakness was their arrogance. They believed they had one. They believed I was a non-entity, a ghost haunting the hallways of Serenity Meadows. And ghosts, as they would soon learn, can see everything. I feigned a deeper slide into senility. I became their perfect picture of a doddering father. It was a humiliating performance, but a necessary one. It made them careless. During their visits, they started talking business in front of me as if I weren't there, discussing deals and company finances, convinced the words were just meaningless noise to my addled brain. I was a sponge, soaking up every name, every project detail, every whispered complaint about a difficult city official. I relayed it all to Sal in our weekly garden meetings. My plan wasn't to win in a courtroom. They had the best lawyers money could buy. A legal challenge from a man they had declared incompetent would be laughed out of existence. My war would be fought in the shadows. It would be a war of 1,000 cuts, aimed at the one thing they cared about more than money, their reputation. I need you to find a reporter, I whispered to Sal, pressing a folded piece of paper into his hand. Someone young, hungry, who wants to make a name for themselves. Someone at the Boston Globe. On the paper was a single, cryptic phrase, ask about the Turkish steel in the Lexington Tower. It was the first stone to be thrown. Sal, bless his resourceful soul, found the perfect journalist, a relentless investigative reporter named Maya Singh. She was known for digging into the city's corrupt real estate scene. Sal, acting as an anonymous, disgruntled former employee, fed her the tip. At first, she was skeptical. Blackwood Construction was a Boston institution, my name synonymous with quality and integrity. But the tip was specific enough to pique her interest. While she started her investigation, I laid the groundwork for the next phase. I knew every secret of that company, every shortcut ever taken, every skeleton in every closet. Years ago, my now-deceased partner, Frank, had a habit of greasing the wheels with city inspectors. It was a practice I despised and eventually forced out of the company, but the records of those payments, I suspected, still existed somewhere, buried deep in the old paper archives stored in the warehouse down in the Seaport district. Julian and Evelyn, with their obsession with digitization, would have ignored that mountain of paper as a relic of a bygone era. The warehouse on Drydock Avenue, I told Sal. Third floor, back corner. Look for file boxes labeled 85 to 95. Frank was meticulous. He kept a separate ledger. Sal's mission was dangerous. It involved a late-night visit, a bribed security guard, and a few tense hours sifting through dusty, forgotten history. But he did it. 2 weeks later, he sat across from me in the garden, his eyes gleaming with grim success. "I found it, Arthur," he breathed. "A whole book of sins. Payments, dates, names of inspectors, half of whom are still in senior positions at City Hall." The pieces were coming into place. The substandard steel in Julian's flagship project was the fuse. Frank's old ledger was the gunpowder. And I was the one with the match. I was about to remind my children that the man who builds the house is the only one who knows exactly how to tear it down. The first tremor hit on a Tuesday. Maya Singh's article dropped on the front page of the Boston Globe, both in print and online. The headline was explosive: "Cracks in the Foundation, Whistleblower Alleges Substandard Materials in Blackwood's Lexington Tower." The story was a masterpiece of investigative journalism. Singh had managed to get a sample of the steel from the site tested by an independent lab, confirming it was a cheaper, weaker alloy than the one specified in the city building codes. She quoted anonymous sources, Sal and Carol, their identities carefully protected, who detailed Julian's cost-cutting measures and off-the-books dealings. The article didn't just question the integrity of the building, it questioned the integrity of its new leadership. The fallout was immediate. City inspectors, their own reputations now on the line, swarmed the Lexington Tower, issuing a stop-work order that froze the billion-dollar project solid. The investors, who had poured hundreds of millions into the development, began to panic. Julian and Evelyn tried to control the narrative. They issued a press release calling the article a baseless attack by a disgruntled former employee, vowing full cooperation and promising that Blackwood's standards were impeccable. They were arrogant, defiant, and completely unaware that this was just the opening salvo. While they were busy with damage control, I had Sal deliver the second package. This one wasn't for a journalist. It was a plain manila envelope, sent anonymously to the office of the Suffolk County District Attorney. Inside was a copy of a single page from Frank's old ledger, a page detailing a series of payments made 20 years ago to a man who was now the head of the city's entire Department of Inspectional Services. There was no note, no explanation. Just a cold, hard piece of history. It was a calculated risk. I was implicating the company I had built, tarnishing my own name in the process. But my name was already mud, according to my children. Sometimes, to save a forest, you have to start a controlled burn. The DA's office was quiet at first, but I knew what was happening. Behind the scenes, a different kind of investigation was starting, one that didn't involve the press. They would be digging, quietly at first, into decades of Blackwood building permits, looking for a pattern. I was using the company's past to destroy my children's future. My kids visited me the following Sunday. The strain was showing. Julian's face was pale, his usual smugness replaced by a frantic, hunted look. Evelyn's eyes were puffy, and her forced smile was brittle. "It's a nightmare, Dad," Julian said, running a hand through his hair. "It's a shakedown. Someone is trying to ruin us." I just looked at him, my expression placid, my mind a whirlwind of cold satisfaction. I offered him a piece of the dry biscuit that came with my tea. He stared at my hand, his face a mask of confusion and disgust. "Do you even understand what's happening?" Evelyn asked, her voice sharp with frustration. I just smiled vaguely and nodded, playing my part to perfection. "The garden is lovely this time of year," I said, looking out the window. They left in a storm of exasperation, more convinced than ever that I was lost in my own world. They had no idea that I was the architect of their misery, the ghost pulling the levers from behind the curtain. As I watched their car speed away, I knew the foundation of their kingdom was beginning to crack, and I was just getting started. The pressure on Julian and Evelyn was mounting from all sides. The Lexington Tower was a financial black hole, bleeding millions each week it remained shut down. The investors had filed a massive lawsuit, and the DA's investigation into the Inspectional Services Department had widened, casting a pall of suspicion over every permit Blackwood had ever been granted. The media, smelling blood, was relentless. Every day brought a new story, a new leak, a new expert questioning the company's practices. My children were trapped in a house of cards, and a hurricane was blowing. It was time to bring it all down. For the final act, I needed to hit them where it would hurt the most, their personal greed. From their careless conversations in my room, I had learned they were trying to liquidate assets quietly to cover their mounting legal fees and placate the angry investors. Their prize target was the company's downtown headquarters, a 50-story skyscraper on Federal Street, the crown jewel of the Blackwood empire. They were negotiating a secret sale to a foreign conglomerate, hoping a massive cash infusion would stop the bleeding. I had Sal use a burner phone to call the head of the conglomerate's acquisitions team in New York. Posing as a senior executive from a rival Boston firm, Sal warned him that the DA was on the verge of seizing Blackwood's key assets as part of their expanding criminal investigation, and that the Federal Street building was at the top of the list. He advised them to pull their offer immediately unless they wanted to get dragged into a legal quagmire. It was a complete bluff, but in the current climate of scandal, it was believable. The foreign conglomerate, spooked, pulled their 9-figure offer overnight. The deal collapsed. That was the final, fatal blow. The news of the failed sale leaked, and the last of the investors' confidence evaporated. The banks called in their loans. Blackwood Construction, the titan of the Boston skyline, was forced to declare Chapter 11 bankruptcy. It was all over. The empire I had spent a lifetime building was dismantled in less than 6 months. The news played out on the television in the common room at Serenity Meadows. I sat in my usual armchair, watching a reporter stand in front of my downtown headquarters, detailing the company's spectacular collapse. She spoke of Julian and Evelyn's gross mismanagement and alleged corruption. My children's faces flashed on the screen, haggard, broken, defeated, as they were swarmed by cameras outside a courthouse. They had lost everything. The company, their reputation, their fortune. They were pariahs. A nurse came by and patted my shoulder. "Such a shame, what happened to your family's business, Mr. Blackwood?" she said with genuine sympathy. I looked up at her, summoning the most vacant, confused expression I could manage. "My family?" I asked, as if the name on the screen meant nothing to me. "I used to be a builder, you know." She gave me a sad little smile and moved on. I turned my gaze back to the television, to the images of my children's ruin. There was no joy, no triumph. Just the quiet, hollow satisfaction of a promise kept. The camera zoomed in on the Blackwood Construction logo carved into the granite above the buildings. Entrance, a monument to a legacy that was now nothing but rubble and ash. In the months that followed, the dust settled. The bankruptcy courts picked over the carcass of my company, selling it off piece by piece to pay the creditors and the lawsuits. Julian and Evelyn, entangled in their own legal battles and blaming each other for the catastrophe, lost their homes, their friends, and their standing in the city. I heard from Sal that they were now living in a small, rented house somewhere, their names forever stained. I remained at Serenity Meadows. It was my home now. The court had appointed a public guardian to oversee my affairs, a kind woman who saw me as a tragic, blameless victim of my children's greed. My needs were met. I had my books, my window with the view of the manicured lawn, and the quiet satisfaction of a job finished. Sal visited me one last time before he moved to Florida to be with his daughter. We sat in the garden, the late autumn sun weak on our faces. He looked at me, his old friend, the man they called a ghost. "Was it worth it, Arthur?" he asked, his voice low. "To tear it all down? Everything you built?" I thought for a long moment, watching the groundskeeper rake the fallen leaves into piles. I remembered the pride in Maria's eyes, the weight of the tools in my hands, the feeling of raising something permanent from the dirt. I had built an empire for them, an inheritance meant to last for generations. They had seen it not as a gift, but as a cage, and me as its aging warden. They didn't want to inherit my legacy, they wanted to cash it in. So I gave them exactly what they deserved, nothing. I finally turned to Sal, a small, cold smile touching my lips for the first time in a very long time. They took my name, my money, and my home. So I took their future. A foundation, after all, is the easiest thing to break if you're the one who built it. The end.